Lawmakers are responding to the first public testimonies as part of the impeachment inquiry. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi focused attention on a new term today. She said yesterday's hearings show the president's actions toward Ukraine amounted to bribery. Here's her exchange with CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes.
So what was the bribe here?
The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance in return for a public statement of a fake investigation into the elections.
So could we
that's bribery.
Could we be looking at an article of impeachment?
I don't know about that. We haven't even made a decision to impeach. That's what the inquiry is about. And when the committees decide that, and they will decide what the articles are. But I am saying that what is the president has admitted to and says it's perfect, I said it's perfectly wrong. It's bribery.
Those comments come one day after diplomats Bill Taylor and George Kent appeared before the House Intelligence Committee. Taylor is the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine. Kent is the Deputy Assistant Secretary overseeing policy in the region. In a new revelation, Taylor publicly testified a staff member of his overheard a call between President Trump and U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. Taylor says that conversation happened one day after the now highly scrutinized phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's leader.
The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for.
President Trump says he was too busy to watch the testimony. However, yesterday he told reporters this was the first time he's heard about the phone call with Sondland. On Twitter today, President Trump attacked how Democrats are approaching the inquiry. He called the probe a, quote, hoax that's bad for the country. Let's bring in Major Garrett and Sheryl Gay Stolberg. Major is the chief Washington correspondent for CBS News. Sheryl is a congressional correspondent for the New York Times. Welcome to both of you. Major, is this first round of public hearings affecting how the White House is responding overall to the impeachment inquiry?
Well, each hearing day is different, and the White House knows that. So what it looked at yesterday is not what it's going to look at tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be Maria Yovanovitch, the ambassador the president recalled, and there's going to be a story told before that hearing about a rogue campaign to smear her reputation, damage her entire career of service to this country, and essentially run her out of an ambassadorship in order to fortify and strengthen this side diplomatic arrangement the president was engineering at the offices and through the efforts in Ukraine of Rudy Giuliani. That's a completely different look and sound to what happened yesterday, which was yesterday about essentially a foreign policy disagreement and elements that these two long-serving diplomats, George Kent and William Taylor, had wondering about this irregular channel, but not themselves being victims of it in the way Yovanovitch will be portrayed tomorrow. So the White House strategy, such as it exists, is to adapt to each and every day. And tomorrow, the strategy will be, if Ambassador Yovanovitch feels mistreated, we are somewhat aware of that, but we're not sorry for it because she serves, as every ambassador does, at the pleasure of the president. The president can and will do those things as he decides. And she's not collateral damage. She's just someone who was replaced. And the president and the White House will again say that may be sad. It may create some sort of emotional resonance in the hearing room or across the country. But in the end, it's not relevant to this case because she was recalled long before the July 25th phone call, doesn't have any direct knowledge, and the president can get rid of her anytime he wants to.
Well, Sheryl, I want to go back to that sound we played a moment ago from Nancy Pelosi this morning. What is the significance of the speaker now using the word bribery to describe the administration's actions?
Well, it's very significant. You know, the Constitution specifies that a president may be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So it explicitly defines as a high crime and misdemeanor bribery. And so Pelosi's use of that language clearly is ratcheting things up. It's also, I think, a an effort by Democrats to make what they're doing more understandable to the public. For weeks now, maybe months, we've been hearing the use of the phrase quid pro quo, Latin, sort of tit for tat. But a lot of the public doesn't understand what quid pro quo means. So I think what we're seeing now is an effort by Democrats to turn up the heat on President Trump, to make a very specific case that he has committed an impeachable offense, and to bring the public along.
Well, Major, as we mentioned, Bill Taylor's testimony has landed Gordon Sondland at the center of this controversy. President Trump tried to distance himself from the ambassador to the European Union last week. Let's listen to some of that.
I hardly know the gentleman, but this is the man who said there was no quid pro quo.
Major, what more have we learned about this phone call that Taylor's staffer heard between Sondland and President Trump?
Well, that in that phone call, this would be the day after President Trump talked to President Zelensky of Ukraine. The president said, according to this person who overheard the president's voice coming through Gordon Sondland's cell phone, that he was more interested in, and Gordon Sondland said, the president said this to him, more interested in the investigation of the Bidens than Ukraine in general, meaning foreign policy was secondary to the president's personal interest in a investigation which might have political benefit to him, presently or sometime in the future. That's what was said by William Taylor yesterday. The person whom he identified as a staffer has been identified, will be subject to a deposition tomorrow in private, and then Gordon Sondland will testify next week, and some of this will be aired fully. Gordon Sondland will have a chance to respond to this allegation that not only did he talk to the president with some frequency, but had direct evidence of the president expressing a particular interest in the Biden investigation over and above his general interest in the welfare and fate of Ukraine, which, if true, again, if true, would go to reinforce the Democratic argument that there was something here of personal interest to the president, and he was using congressionally appropriated military aid over another country as a point of leverage, to which Democrats would say that is outside the boundaries of anything that is acceptable in the presidential powers that we've come to know.
Major, the president, as you know, has been considering releasing the summary of a call he had in April with the Ukrainian leader. What is the White House hoping to accomplish with this memo, if and when it is made public?
If and when. The president has tantalizingly suggested he wants to, but even that seems to be somewhat up for grabs. But let's just say, for the sake of argument and assumption, not fact, not happened, but let's just say it does. What's the idea behind it? Well, the president will say, I'm doubly transparent about something that's doubly benign. Everything we've heard, and a couple of senators talked to reporters on Capitol Hill today after having a conversation with the president yesterday at the White House, which this topic came up, that it's a very benign phone call, that there's nothing very much substantive about it at all, which would be consistent with calls of this nature. One established leader, in this case, President Trump, calling a newly elected, just elected leader, congratulatory. And can we get together? Might you come to the inauguration? Are there some celebrations we can be a part of together? That sort of stuff. If it is that benign, and there's no reason to suspect it isn't, then the president would say, see, there's just nothing here. I'm completely transparent. I'm giving you everything that's relevant, and there's no there there. That would be the reason to put this transcript out.
Well, Sheryl, when it comes to impeachment in a broader sense, I want to pull from some of your recent reporting. You found House Republicans critical of President Trump are towing an anti-impeachment party line for now. What is the political calculus for these White House critics at this moment?
Well, I think the political calculus is they have to kind of straddle the line. They can't anger the Republican base, especially those that are running for re-election. They don't want to draw primary challengers. But at the same time, they have long been uncomfortable with President Trump, various aspects of his policies and his behavior. I'm thinking of lawmakers like Will Hurd in Texas, a Republican congressman who is actually the lone African-American Republican Republican in the House and who is retiring, so one would think that he might be free to break with the president, but he hasn't. And he hasn't, I believe, in part because he is planning a 2024 presidential run. So he wants to keep hold of that Republican base. Other lawmakers like Fred Upton and Adam Kinzinger both have expressed concerns about the president's actions in Ukraine, about whether or not he did withhold military aid in exchange or as a way to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. But both have kept their powder dry and voted, as did every other Republican, along party lines, not to pursue these public hearings. So I think we will see, as the evidence comes out, whether or not these Republicans will continue to stick with the president. Can he keep them in line? And if he can't, we could see a kind of break. Democrats like to note, in fact, Speaker Pelosi noted today at her press conference that with Nixon, it wasn't until the very last minute that Republicans deserted him en masse. I don't think anybody is suggesting that that's going to happen here. Views are pretty well set, but I think even a few defections would be a stain on Trump's presidency, and the president will do everything he can to try to prevent that from happening.
So while the impeachment inquiry moves forward, other issues are stalled, including gun safety legislation. Today, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal was making a speech to his colleagues about gun reform when he learned about the latest mass shooting in California. Let's take a look at how that unfolded.
We are complicit in these deaths if we fail to act. As I speak, on the floor right now, there is a school shooting in Santa Clara, California. How can we turn the other way? How can we refuse to see that shooting in real time, demanding our attention, requiring our action?
So Blumenthal has co-sponsored legislation with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Here's what Graham said today about those efforts.
We're kind of stuck, I think. Impeachment's sucked all the energy out of this place, and that's too bad. But, yeah, I can't tell you the latest.
Is there any bandwidth within the Senate and White House?
There is for me. I'm dying to do something about this and a bunch of other things. I think we're waiting on the White House, to be honest with you. Yeah.
The president about that?
I talked to him about 2 or 3 weeks ago on my bill with Blumenthal, the grant program for red flag laws. I think we've got in a really good spot with the White House, but that's just part of the package.
So, Major, do we know where efforts stand within the administration on gun legislation?
All the air is completely out of that balloon, Elaine. There's been no aggressive action or conversation, as there was in the immediate aftermath of the El Paso and Dayton shootings, where for days and going on weeks, there were at least policy conversations, lots of different options presented to the president, no consensus. The president could not decide what he wanted to do, was getting lots of outside counsel from his Republican Trump-based advisors not to go in the direction of red flag laws, or if he did, proceed with extreme caution, and certainly do not embrace universal background checks. And it appears as the energy and activity within the White House has completely ground to a halt, that the president heeded that advice, and there's no sense within the White House that those meetings, which were frequent, and policy ideas coming to the president with some repetitiveness, that's all ceased. And to one point that Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, just raised, he said yesterday he didn't watch the hearings because he has better things to do legislatively, in a legislative posture in the Senate. Other Republicans have said as much today. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either impeachment is a really big deal and it's a very serious subject and it's taking all the air and oxygen out of the room, or you're not paying attention to it because it is irrelevant and you're doing your other work. Which is it?
Excellent point. Major, finally, on your podcast, The Takeout, this week, you spoke with Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin. Let's go ahead and listen to a preview.
If their argument is that in the final analysis, the investigations were not launched, despite every best effort by the president and Giuliani and their henchmen, and the money was ultimately released, that's essentially a confession. They're like someone who's robbing a bank, who's got 2 big bags of money, is about to leave the bank, and then the security guards pounce on the person, and they dust themselves off and say, "Oh, well, all's well that ends well. No money was taken out of this bank. Nothing was ever converted."
So obviously the congressman there discussing impeachment. What more can you tell us, Major, about your interview?
So why do we have Jamie Raskin on the show? Well, he's a member of the Oversight Committee, which means he has been participating in many of the depositions taken. He said 9 of the 12 he thought that he had participated in fully, which means so he's an active participant in the process that's gone on behind closed doors. He's also on the Judiciary Committee, which means when the House Intelligence Committee, which is currently conducting this public part of the inquiry, hands its information off to the Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin will be one of the Democrats being asked for his opinion on which articles of impeachment should be drawn up, what should they entail, and how should Democrats vote. Now, some in the audience may say, Major, that's all a foregone conclusion. Well, maybe impeachment is. I don't know. You may think it is. But the articles aren't. That's a completely undrafted part of this story. And one of the things that Jamie Raskin said in our conversation is it would be his advice to the House Judiciary Committee Democrats not to limit articles of impeachment to the Ukraine controversy. He's as much interested in other elements, which he says fall under that heading, high crimes and misdemeanors. He specifically believes this president, through indirect retention of his business interests, has profited from the presidency and his domestic properties and bringing in those from overseas to stay at them. He believes that is a crime, a high crime, and sufficiently proved to require, not just think about, but require an article of impeachment. That's a perspective that I think, if doesn't come to fruition, will certainly be debated by the House Judiciary Committee. That's one of the reasons we booked him. And we also wanted to have a voice for our audience slightly different than we've had the 2 weeks before. We had 2 solid Republicans, Henry McMaster, the governor of South Carolina, and Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, both saying the president did nothing wrong. Well, we had 2 weeks of that. Jamie Raskin is not there to say, because I want him to, but because he believes it, that there's another side of that story, and you hear it in full voice this week.
Can't wait to hear it. Major Garrett and Sheryl Gay Stolberg, thank you both. Great to have you.